Hey, how's it going, everybody? Dr. Medic here. This month we have everybody's favorite Frenchman, the Spy. If you don't know at this point, this is the series where I take my underappreciated weapons video from last July and I cut it up into segments for your enjoyment. Oh man, I just realized, from last July? That was a year ago. Man, time flies. Anyway, that video was an hour and 40 minutes long, way too long for some people, so this series kind of cut it up into smaller segments to make it a little bit more approachable for some people. Basically what I do is I just give one weapon for each slot and I explain why I think it's underrated. To make it more interesting, especially for those who've seen the original video, this one will have a segment created at the end specifically for this video. That weapon can be for any slot I want it to be for. Now that you're caught up, let's go. Believe it or not, Spy has a gun. Even though this seems to go over most spies' heads, yes, he has a revolver. And they're all pretty good, and they all have their reasons to be used. But there is one that I think gets a little bit more flack than it really deserves. That one, without a doubt, has to be the Enforcer. The Enforcer has a long history, from being a straight upgrade when paired with the Dead Ringer, since its original downside made it so it took longer to cloak, but the Dead Ringer was instant. But then it was changed to just being kind of strong, to a little bit less strong, but still pretty dang strong, to almost useless, but not terrible, I guess, and then finally they buffed it, and it's now okay. It's an okay revolver. The current Enforcer has a 20% damage bonus while disguised, which means you get one shot with the additional damage, which brings your base damage from 40 to 48, which means if you're up close, it goes from 60 to 72. It also has the ability to pierce certain resistances like the Fist of Steel, Brass Beast, and Vaccinator Bubbles. Though this can be buggy sometimes, and it was really buggy when the stat was first added, but it has been mostly fixed, so it works for the most part. However, there is the downside of no random crits, which has a history of its own. It didn't originally have this no random crit stat, and unlike most weapons that do, it doesn't have an on-demand crit stat. It's just the fact that the crit does 144 damage, which was a little bit overkill. So that's why it has a downside. But its actual downside is a 20% slower firing speed. The reason that Enforcer is here is, well, because it's hated a little bit more than I think it really needs to be. You know, it's not the best revolver, but it's really not that bad. The Ambassador could have also been talked about here, but there are still spies who make good use of it. Plenty of spies who make good use of it. You know, so it's still relevant, but the Enforcer, nope, left to rot. I've heard people legit call it useless, and I think that's a bit of an overstatement. First, the 20% damage bonus while disguised means that if you're close enough, you can two-shot like classes, without having to hit headshots, which is nice. It also doesn't have ridiculous spread that the Ambassador does. On top of that, while piercing resistances of something like the Vaccinator sounds nice, it isn't very practical, but Wrangled Sentries, Fists of Steel, Dead Ringers, all a nice touch. And you may say, oh, just backstab him. Well, good luck doing that when he's in active combat with you, or if you'd have to go through many of his teammates in order to do anything. Using your gun is sometimes a requirement, and the Enforcer is pretty good. If you're disguised, like most spies would be at the time, you get an extra 20% damage bonus, which is really nice. And the downside is a 20% firing speed penalty, which is pretty minimal. This thing really doesn't have harsh downsides. The Enforcer is not a bad revolver, it's just kind of misunderstood, like me. Put in the work, and it isn't a bad pick if you don't want to deal with Ambassador shenanigans, or if you have enough morals not to use the Diamondback. Just so I don't have to do 4 segments, I'm going to talk about the next 2 together. I'm going to save the knife segment for its kind of own segment, I guess. But the Sapper and Watch, I'm going to combine them together so I don't have to say much individually. But Enforcer, good. Well, there's only one Sapper unlock, and it's probably obvious that I'm not going to be speaking about the stock Sapper. And as for watches, there really isn't one that's bad, so I'm going to talk about the greatness of the Cloak and Dagger. Not really underrated, but I had to include something. The red tape recorder will go first. It has the upside of every 3 seconds de-leveling any building it's on. It used to be 1.6 seconds, but of course they had to overcorrect it, right? It only lasted about a day. Though, yes, a level 3 could be turned into a level 1 over time, going from level 3 to level 2 to level 1, or if it's a level 2, going from level 2 to level 1. However, it comes with a 100% damage penalty, dealing no actual damage to the building, just slowly de-leveling it. Eventually, it will be able to destroy the building, but it takes much longer than the stock sapper. People tend to think it's useless, but yeah, it's pretty good in two situations, those being mini-sentry engineers and groups of engineers. When there's a gunslinger engineer on the other team, chances are they're playing aggressive, and unless they are right next to their sentry, it is often worth just letting the mini go down and die in order to plop down a new one. You hear this all the time in defense of the red tape recorder, but it's true. A gunslinger engineer is less likely to try to go run over to wherever his sentry is and destroy the sapper. It just makes more sense to wait for the sapper to finish, kill the sentry, and then place down a new one. Well, the red tape recorder takes a lot longer to actually destroy the sentry, so there's a lot longer where there's no sentry on the battlefield. Sort of. The other situation is when there is a group of engineers. They'll be frantically trying to kill you and unsap their buildings. So if they manage to level down some buildings, making an impact where the stock sapper really wouldn't have done anything. They're frantically trying to kill you and unsap their buildings, so you'll probably manage to down some buildings, making an impact where the stock sapper just wouldn't have done anything, because it could easily just be repaired. Whereas now they gotta spend a whole 200, 400 metal or whatever, re-upgrading all their buildings. And then of course there's psyops. I mean, imagine, you're waiting to respawn, you can see your dispenser going down, but it's going down very, very slowly. It really takes a toll on the mind. Now for the Cloak and Dagger, it's a watch that's tied to your movement rather than time, so you can stay invisible indefinitely as long as you don't, well, move too much and deplete the meter. And even if you do deplete the meter, you'll just kind of show, I guess. It's like you kind of blink almost, but you're like half visible, basically. It has a 100% faster recharge rate for the downside of 35% less cloak back from ammo pickups and the inability to pick up ammo while you're actually invisible, though this can be circumvented by just decloaking and recloaking real quick, assuming that nobody's around. The Cloak and Dagger isn't underrated, I just needed something. All of Spy's watches are equally good in my opinion, unless they're really good at using the Dead Ringer, then the Dead Ringer kind of just takes the cake over everything else. Though the Cloak and Dagger is great for doing what Spy does best, waiting for the best moment to strike and pick. You have to play the game a bit slower, yeah, but it can allow you to more effectively position yourself if you're playing a map that doesn't have many ammo packs. This watch is just better for ensuring that you can get the strike at the right moment. The only thing that sucks is it drains very quickly, so you have to move very diligently. You can crouch, which will allow you to get more distance without depleting as much of the meter, but that means you have to move very, very slowly, which has screwed me over in the past. But it does have use cases. Both the red tape recorder and Cloak and Dagger are not that bad, especially talking for the red tape recorder. Sure, if you're an aggressive spy, the red tape sucks, but if you're a spy like me, who's more there to pester and occasionally pick, the red tape can be a great item for annoying the hell out of the other team. The Cloak and Dagger isn't underrated, I just needed something. This is it, the last weapon we have to cover. This was a long video, but we made it. The melee I decided to go with for Spy, and the last weapon we're going to have to talk about today, without a doubt, has to be the Spycicle, which may be a surprise to some of you, but I think a lot of you will understand why I picked it. The Spycicle is an interesting item. The knife works identically to stock for the most part, but puts up a giant middle finger to Pyros, which I can't help but love. When hit by fire, you become immune to all fire damage for 1 second and afterburn damage for 10. However, you lose your knife for 15 seconds, though this can be expedited by picking up ammo packs. The only other downside is the fact that enemies get turned to ice statues, which will alert the enemy team that there is definitely a spy. Though typically, there's a spy on the other team, but I guess it's just most definitely going to alert them that there's a spy. I guess. It is a downside listed, so I need to bring it up. This weapon isn't disliked like some of the weapons I talked about. There isn't really a hatred for the Spycicle, but it seems to get left in the dust a little more often than a lot of the other knives. I was also contemplating talking about the Your Eternal Reward and how that wasn't really bad. Then I used it for a couple of games and realized how harsh that 33% cloak drain is. It just hits So hard. So the Spycicle it is. I really have little to say about it, to be honest. It's just a good knife. The Spycicle can make it a little bit easier to get out of jams when you come face to face with Pyro without any real downsides, and this has happened to me multiple times. Yeah, you can't use your knife for about 15 seconds, but pick up one of the million medium ammo packs just lying around and it'll reduce it by 7.5 seconds. Do it again and you're back in business. Yes, it has the possibility to mess up chain stabs or cause you to have to retreat early when you could have gotten an extra stab because, a particle of fire hit you. Though in general, this does increase your survivability a lot more than it lowers it and is worth it 90% of the time, since it's almost a straight upgrade to the stock knife. And when there's no Pyro on the other team, well then I guess it's a straight downgrade. But when is there not a Pyro on the other team, am I right? But yeah, I guess in that situation, not having Pyro on the other team, it's probably not that great to use, but, you know, these are unlocks, they're situational, they're side grades. Like I said, there are cases where this knife isn't great, but that goes for all weapons for the most part. The Spycicle is a good knife for getting those picks and giving a middle finger to those mumbling ashbags. The weapon for Spy's new segment was a weapon I was going back and forth on, deciding whether or not to include it in my original video. I ended up going with the Enforcer since I had a stronger case for it, and I believe that more people thought that weapon was bad, when in reality it's just mediocre. Big difference. I decided to stick up for it instead. This weapon has received a similar stigma to the Enforcer, but not nearly to the same degree. If the Enforcer is an 8, this is a 3.5, 4 tops, so I didn't want to spend too much time talking about it. Well, now I have to deliver you guys a new segment, so it's the perfect time to talk about it. That weapon is the Ambassador. The Ambassador was Spy's first ever revolver unlock, released in 2009 as part of the Sniper vs. Spy update, and it used to suck. Only mini critting on headshot. Then it was buffed to crit on headshot, then they kind of tweaked it a little bit, and now it works the same way pretty much, but it has a new stat that was super controversial, which is why it's part of this video today in the first place. So let's go over the stats. Yes, the main upside of this weapon, and the only posted upside of this weapon, is that it can crit on headshot. Full crit, 3 times damage. Though it also has 2 secret stats relating to this. First, it can only headshot once every second or so. The Ambassador has a faster spread recovery than the stock revolver, however during the time in between, its accuracy is significantly reduced and is unable to headshot even if you manage to get lucky and hit an enemy in the head. This is why the Ambassador's crosshairs grow every time you shoot before shrinking back down. This is an indicator for when 1, your spread has fully recovered and you will be completely accurate again, and then 2, the Ambassador can headshot once more. Then we have 4 whole downsides on top of this. The first listed downside is a 15% damage penalty, reducing the base damage from 40 to 34. The second is a 20% slower firing speed, meaning it takes 0.6 seconds between trigger pulls, rather than the 0.5 akin to the Enforcer. Third, no random crits, which I think is fair enough, since it has a pretty intuitive crit on demand stat. Before Jungle Inferno 2017 came around and added the 4th and final downside, that's where we would have ended it. However, they added the most controversial downside, I wouldn't say in the whole update, but especially in Spy's kit. Critical damage is affected by range. This means at closer distances up to about mid-range, the crit will deal 102 damage on headshot. Though as you get further away, this is reduced to just 54 damage. After 1200 hammer units, or about the distance a grenade from the Demoman's pipe bomb launcher will travel in a second, the Ambassador can no longer headshot at all. Another hidden downside to this, that's not immediately obvious, is the fact that, while it's intended to apply to headshots, this actually just applies to crits in general. Whether that be from capping the intel, or getting crits Krieg, medic, or whatever, and it also applies to mini crits as well. So if there's a buff man or soldier, those will have fall off too. It's crazy. It's a little bit less impactful than the headshot, since that's going to be what it's affecting the most, but I thought I'd list it. Wow, this sounds like it just kind of sucks. It sounds like I bashed this thing 6 ways to Sunday. In reality though, most of these downsides are inconsequential. No random crits means pretty much nothing, as honestly, Spy's revolver crits have just kind of felt like an oddity. They can't be relied on as much as other classes crits. I don't know if I'm the only one that feels that way, but Spy revolver crits just, they don't hit the same. The secret inaccuracy downside is worse than both of these, though the quicker spread and good aim can make up for it in the vast majority of times. The crit fall-off range was hated so much when it was first added, because it didn't allow Spies to snipe like they used to. In my opinion, the nerf was mostly unnecessary, but the thing is, as soon as people heard about this, they began to write it off as being trash. In reality, if you can hit your shots, it can still be rather effective. On-demand 102 damage headshots can absolutely cripple enemies. 102 damage against anyone can be devastating, and from a revolver no less. Sure, it begins to fall off at further ranges, but TF2's combat is mostly close to medium range, which means outside of some edge cases, you're going to be doing full damage, or just below that, where it's not really going to make a big difference. When using the Ambassador, you realize that medium range, when the damage starts to fall off, is actually rather lenient and a good bit of distance in most fights. Where any Spy's revolvers would start to suffer, you're going to be doing like 96 to 76 damage if you are doing the whole 102. The Ambassador, while objectively worse than it was before, is still really good in 95% of gunfights. Do not relegate this weapon to page 50 of your backpack. If you haven't tried it in a while, give it a shot again, no pun intended. You'll find that while there is less cheese potential than before, it is still good at what it does, and that outcry from the community was a bit dramatic. The gun is still not a bad choice for those who can hit their shots relatively consistently. This is the last video in the Underappreciated Weapons series, so if this is the first one you watched, you got 8 other ones that came before this, and if you'd like to binge those, go ahead. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to do next. I may be skipping the month of August, but who knows for sure. We'll see when we get there. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you later.